Hello,
Good evening.
good evening.
Yo,
How is everyone?
doing all
Doing
right.
well.
Sweet. Love to hear it. Okay, so I was hoping to maybe get to authentication today, but I think authentication is a pretty hairy subject, and I think we should just push it to the capstone. So we'll cover authentication during the capstone, and today we'll finish up the put slash update routes, and then we'll talk about relations within MongoDB. So we've seen how you can sort of just embed any sort of related content something might have within whatever, like a single document. So we talked about how, if there's an author and they have books, but you can just have like an author collection, and then have like a books property on the author that's like an array of books. But there's certain reasons why storing data like that may not be great. And so MongoDB kind of gives you the flexibility to do it in various different ways. So sometimes it's great to be able to just nest data like that, and it works well for your application, but then sometimes it doesn't. So we just want to know how to do both. So we'll get to that today as well. Any questions before I jump into the update stuff? Cool. Okay. And reminder, last class is Saturday. Crazy. Really crazy.
So weird.
That's crazy. No.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to meet secretly or something.
Okay, I don't want that screen. I want the other one. Okay. Okay, you guys can see VS Code. And is it pretty small? I can make this a little bigger. Okay. So we want to pick up where we left off last time. So I will copy what we had from day 6 into day 7. There you go. So I've got the folder that's got our next app copied over, and then I want to go ahead and start this server. So I've got, remember, you can open a terminal in VS Code. So that's what I've been doing lately. And I've got my terminal here, and then I can move to where I need to be, which is module 5, day 7. And then in class is the folder that's got my next app in it. And so from here I can run what command to start working or developing?
npm run dev.
Yes. All right. Sometimes you guys may ran into this. If you like leave your server running in some other terminal or some other VS Code session, then you'll like try to bind to the same port, because you can only have one thing listening on any given port. And so if you ever run into that, it'll be like, hey, 3000 is not available. And sometimes stuff is fancy enough to where it'll like try to pick another port for you, which I think is what Next does. So just keep in mind, usually I try to just have one Next app running at a time. So we can open this in our browser now. And we had just like a very basic root route, but then I think we had / listings or something. Yeah. And it seems like I'm maybe getting an error. Or potentially the DB is like sleeping. Because I think I have like a free one, so it may take a while, but
I thought it was at /app. And then listing.
oh, you know what? I
Say?
think. Sorry, what were you saying?
I thought it was maybe it's that it was bringing it up with a /API, not app. My bad.
Oh, so yeah,
And
so-
/ listings.
well, yeah, so there's API / listings, but this is the,
Not the same. Okay.
well, this is like the route, that's the backend route that's gonna respond with JSON. And then but like our listings page is a front end route and it will query the backend route. I don't want to go on an aside, but it's actually, this is like, I don't know, this is kind of a cool moment. So like our server's not able to connect to the database. I think it's because I'm at the GitWit office in Tulsa, and so the IP address is different than the one I whitelisted on Atlas, and so it's just like not letting my server talk to it. But like, if someone was using your app and there was some sort of issue, like this is not a good place for the app to be in, like just like spinning like this. So a good thing to do is to on our page here for listings, which is here, we have our fetch. And it is throwing an error. Actually, it's going to be too complicated. I haven't taught you guys how to do try catches yet, so we're going to have to save this for another time and not go down this aside. But what a good thing to do is basically like this here, this part of the code is failing. So like our fetch is giving back a 500. And so there's a way for us to catch errors and then have our code do something in response to that error. We haven't learned that quite yet, and that I don't want to get into it for today, but just know that that's something that we could do. And then basically we could change the way that the app, like what the app is rendering, like not show the loader anymore and show some sort of error. Typically you'll see people have like a toast, like an error notification, like oops, we ran into an issue or something like that. But for now, we'll just fix it and move on. So for this, I need to go to Atlas. And sign in. Bridges. And yep, see current IP address not added, so I'll just add current IP address. And then it's got to like update the database for that to take effect. But there we go. Okay, so now it's working. So we have our listings here. And we can go to this test location and we can see the test location, and right now we can delete it, but there is nothing here that's gonna let us update it. So let's do that. So that page that we were just on is this ID page, right? Because we have listings/ID, which is where we go when we click on something. And then that goes to this page here. And whenever this page loads, it will ask for the ID from the router. So the router is the thing Next provides to us that lets us like ask for what page we're on, like information about the page that we're on, and then also move pages. So we pull the ID from the query, which ID is dictated by what we name this file, remember? So since this file is called bracket ID.js, that means it's going to capture that route parameter as ID. And then we fetch the listing by ID. Okay, so right now we just show the listing name and we just display it. It's not actually in like a form. So what we could do is show that as a text field that you can edit. So we would change this. So basically with MUI, our components here for inputs, you can see there's a text field. And yeah, it's right here. And so we can do this outlined one or this filled one or this standard one, whatever we want. I don't know. I think I usually use this outlined one actually, but let's try standard for today. So instead of typography here, we're going to do a text field. And we need to import that text field from MUI. So now we got a text field. Don't need this ID. And the variant is standard. So that's what's that variant property is what's dictating whether it's standard or filled or outlined. That's what's changing the way it looks. It's just that prop there. And then what do you guys think we want the label to be for this text field? So this, we want to show the name in this text field. So what should the label be?
Just name.
Yep.
So
Okay.
obvious, it felt like a trick question.
I know sometimes my questions are so stupid. It's just to make sure that you're paying attention.
No, it's good.
Okay, so if we want to now show the listing name in there, how would we do that?
Can we
Wait.
do like a placeholder and then placeholder equals listing name, like in the curly brackets?
Yeah, so this is kind of tricky. So there's like placeholder, and then there's default value. Placeholder is typically like, well, like actually, let's see what that. Let's just go ahead and do that. So there's placeholder, and then listing name is here. So listing dot name, or sorry, listing name is like we were already using it inside typography, so I'm just going to put it there. So we can kind of see what this looks like. Yeah, okay, so that works, so like, label is like. There's like no value in the field, right? Because we haven't hooked value into that field yet. And so it thinks it's empty, and so when it's empty, MUI shows you the label, and then when you click here, the label like moves up, and then now it's showing placeholder, which is kind of like, it says test location, right? So placeholder is probably not exactly what we want. There's also default value, which for that, so we could try that. And you can see with that, it's kind of sticking test location in there, and then like it's auto moving the label up because it has a value in there. And then, yeah, and then now we can kind of start changing this here. Oh, that's funny. And then when you like delete all of it, it puts the placeholder back in for you, which is kind of interesting. For us to actually use so like ultimately if we give them this page and then they like click the like update button or whatever to like update it, we're gonna need to pull the value from the form to have whatever is currently typed in there, right? So how do we hook up to the form to get the value from it?
State and use state.
Yeah, so we'll need state, and then what will we do with text field with the state?
You'll need a on change handler.
Yeah, and a value. Yeah, so for our form here, which is similar to when we were creating a listing, we need to follow that same pattern. We also like when we query for the listing, we have use state here with an empty object, and then we get the listing. So we actually sort of have some options here, like of how we could hook this up. There's a few different ways we could approach it. We could have like a new piece of state for all the fields. And like we'd have like listing name and stuff like that. And then whenever we update, we'd like pass that in. We could also like take this listing object that's coming from whenever we do the fetch and hook up like properties of that object to the text field if we wanted to. So like we're doing default value here, we could say like the value equals listing dot name, and then we could say on change. Yeah, so ChatGPT came in to sort of save the day here. And like we could just start kind of mutating the listing that we have, like the whole object for the whole listing, whenever someone types. And so this is basically saying, hey, I want to set listing, which is what we were doing whenever we, like after we fetched it, we would then, like in our fetch down here, we set listing to the data that we get back. This is going to say, hey, every time that you type in the text field that's for the name, like update the listing, the current whole object that we have in state, but just change the name property on it to be the current value of the form. So like we often have done state with just like for forms with just simple state values that are just like a text field or a number or whatever. But you can also have like an object and state and then like update just properties on that object. So this here, I don't know if we need the default value or the placeholder in this format here if we do it this way. And so we can kind of look here and see, yeah, so test location is in there whenever the page loads. And then we can. Yeah, you can see since I did this, like I'm displaying test location name here in the typography. And so, you know, that's getting updated as I change the state. But we wouldn't need this typography anymore, because now we just have this input here. So this is probably the simplest way to do it, I would think. So we can hook up, I don't know what other properties we have actually, so I think in our model currently, all we have is name and bedrooms. Let's add a few more properties to it. So, oh, that's interesting. And this here, it's only giving back just the properties that are in our schema. Okay. So hold on, let me pull up our database real quick. Oh, right, because our test one, we only added those few properties. Because remember, whenever we did, I was like, oh, why is there only bedrooms and name? And that's because that's all the properties that exist on this test location that we added, because like on our listings page, when we hit add listing, those are the only properties that we asked for. Was name, and then I think I maybe manually added bedrooms or something. So yeah, that's the only properties we have currently on that one. I must have I think I manually added bedrooms 5 at a later point. So we've got the name. There's also bedrooms. We could also add like another property like summary, for example. So that's a good property to add. So we'll go back to our schema here. We want to add another property to our schema. It's going to be, so the summary is what type?
Text string.
Yep. The order here doesn't really matter. Like you could organize it in whatever way you kind of see fit. But yeah, so I just stuck it there for no particular reason. So now summary is in there. So I got name, summary, and bedrooms. And so on our ID page, we've currently got a text field that's showing the name with label name. And let's just update this to have summary. And then the value for that will be listing dot summary. And then when we set listing, it would be for summary instead of name. So like we just kind of have to duplicate this pattern for every field that we'd want to allow people to update on. Now, we don't have. Oh, see how these are kind of next to each other and kind of gross? What can I do to get these to look better so that they're like spaced out vertically?
Stack.
Stack, almost always the answer. And we can do like spacing 2 or something. I forgot to import it, so I'm getting an error that stack's not defined. So I go up here and import it. Better. Now these are like taking up the full width, which is kind of gross.
Max width.
Yeah, I think normally, I think it's because it's in a stack now that it's taking up the full width. So we can take a look at MUI and see. Like how they did the layout for these.
DH. That's new.
Do what?
The width on the stack. They had 25 CH or whatever that was, multi-text field root.
Yeah,
that's
Is that for
a-
characters?
That's for a box form, I guess. I've never seen CH, so I just thought that was.
I haven't seen CH either. I don't know what that is. And then they've got a div. If that's how they did all these, yeah. Yeah, it's okay. We'll deal with the full width for now, but there's a way that we can fix it, but it's not what we're trying to worry about at the moment. But now we have a stack. And notice we've got test location showing up, but since our test listing that we did doesn't have a summary yet, it's coming in as undefined. And that's why this field has like the label showing up for us to click into and then start typing it. Now, typically, if something, you don't usually want to bind undefined to something, and so we could make sure that that's like an empty string instead of undefined. But I think it's okay to ignore that warning for now. But I'm getting that warning because of that, but it should still work just fine. Okay, so I can like type in summary now, and it will bind it to our listing object. So I can also go ahead and just console log our listing so we can just see that real quick. So now that I'm typing in summary, we can see that we're getting our like location is getting updated. So we've got the ID and the version, and then bedroom's name, and then summary is showing up in there now too. Okay, so let's just start with this. We could add more properties. We could add like the number property and whatever, but for now, let's just get update working for these two properties. So we need to update our route. So we'll go back and we need to go into our API and then go into our listings for ID. And so we've got a get by ID and we have a delete by ID. And then we do have a put, which is what we use for update, but we don't have the logic for that filled out for it here. So so for that, where do we get, so when we do a post, where does the data come from for the post? Like, where do we get access to the data that they're sending us for that?
The body or the
Yeah, the body of the request.
query or whatever.
Yeah, so we can do like const body equals requests dot body,
Body, yeah.
or we can just do const body equals requests or something like this. Okay, so pull out the body. We also have the existing listing up here. So remember at the very top here, because like for every one of these things, get, put, delete, we need to get the current listing. So we've done that up here. We've done listing find by ID. And if we couldn't find that listing by ID, then we respond with 404. But we find that, and then they're trying to do put, and so they've given us a body with the data, the new data that they want for that listing. So that's in the body. And then we can do listing. I think there's a few ways we can cut this. So like one thing with Mongoose that is interesting is they're like this listing, we can like mutate that thing. So we can say like listing dot name equals new name. Like we can, just like set this to something different and then call, then we call await listing dot save. So this is one style of updating something in the database. And you'll see people do this style in Mongoose. And with this, we could potentially like be very verbose about like what we want to allow updating, because you may not always want to let somebody just like pass whatever they want and just like sort of pass that and let them update any property on it. There may be certain properties you don't want them to update. And so this is a way that we can say, hey, what we allow updating on is specific things. And for that, what we can do is like, let's say we only want to let them update the name and the summary in this, for whatever reason, with this method. Then what we can do is pull from the body specifically summary and name, because those are properties on the object that's being passed. So we can pull that from the body, and then we can say listing.name equals name and listing.summary equals summary, and then call save. So this is one way you can do it. It's like you have to kind of explicitly write out every property that you would want to update. But it can be nice knowing like, hey, like this, it's only going to let you update these properties with this method. Now, there's another way you can do this, which is a little more like loosey-goosey.
Lucy Mongoosey.
Loosey-mongoosey. That's good. I like that. Okay, yeah, so there's this find one and update that we can use as well. We can go back to. Their example here. So this one, we specify how we want like a query for what we want to update, which is like for us, like the ID, like find one document. And we want to find it by ID in this case, but sometimes you may want to like update a document and find it not by the ID, like maybe by someone's email or something. Then we pass the new data that we want to be essentially merged with the existing document. So if a document in the database has name, summary, bedrooms, and then we pass to update just summary, then it will simply just update summary and leave the other properties alone. It won't like replace it and like delete anything. It will just merge it essentially. If it doesn't exist, they provide this upsert option. That upsert is you've probably never heard that term before, but it basically means either update or insert. So update it if it exists. If it doesn't exist, create it. So that there's often like useful, it's often useful to be able to handle both scenarios. So we can basically decide if we want to allow that. We could essentially say, hey, don't upsert. If this doesn't exist, don't create it. Only do this if it already exists. So this is another option that we can do, and we can essentially just pass the entire payload in from the front end. So the front end could add a new property tomorrow, and then this method would still exist. It would just get shoved in there. So both exist. And I often find myself wanting to be more explicit about what's allowed to be updated, but there's plenty of use cases where you would want to just allow whatever, and it's just easier. You don't have to go update it later to add new fields. So both are valid, but for our use cases for now, we'll just stick with this style and see if it's working for us. So this will allow updating the name in the summary and then save it. And then after we've saved it, we wouldn't want to respond with the new one. So calling save, I can't remember if that returns it or not, but we can essentially just do response.status. I don't know what the right status is for update. All right, so I guess 200 is fine in this case. So we'll do response.status 200, and then we're gonna just respond with the latest. Like we'll just want to give back, hey, here's the latest version of that listing. Just like whenever we do a post, we respond with, here's that document, which is helpful often because you're getting the ID. In this case, they probably already have the latest version because they just updated it, but it's still good practice to just respond with, here it is, I updated it, and here's what I have now. Yeah, so there's our put. Let's go back to our page. And we don't have a submit button yet. So I need to add that. And then we also need to call that new API route that we just added, right? So we'll go to our page here. We've got our text field and our text field here. And then we just want to add a button here that variant contained color primary is good. And inside here. Ew. We would want to say update. And then we'll do an on click. And we'll do. Handle submit. So we need to make that function. Get rid of that console log. We'll do async function handle submit. And we'll see what old GPT does for us. So this looks pretty good. So we've got await fetch API listings ID. So with the same URL we use for get, put, delete is here, but then we have our config object. And for this, our method is put, and then we need to pass in the body the current value of that listing object, which is getting mutated by our form fields. And then headers is application JSON. So very similar to the post method, very similar. And then we'll get data back from, because we're going to give, once you update it, we're going to give back the current version. So we'll receive that. And then we don't actually probably don't change the page on this. I don't know, potentially, like we could go back to the main listings page, but honestly, for this kind of thing, I'd probably stay on the current page and just say success, and then they can decide what they want to do from there. So we don't need this. Well, if my preference would be to not change the page, so we don't need this router.push anymore. But we
Do you
probably
not need that? Well, I guess I was gonna say, don't you need that to refresh the page? But I guess if you're already making the updates in the fields, it would basically just be the same.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we have the latest values, right? But potentially there's maybe something like sometimes the server has like additional properties on the model that it's sort of managing. So like maybe if we updated it, there's like a derived property or something computed or something like that, that where we would need to sort of update the page because, you know, what they inputted changed something that needed to be updated. So we are receiving in this the latest data. So, I mean, we could just say, hey, refresh the page and run the query again, but we have the latest data. And so we could simply just set the listing to be that data. And then since we're changing state, it'll refresh the page for us. So yeah, we could say, hey, set listing to be that data, and it'll re-render the page for us. Potentially not necessary, but there is a example where that could be good to do. All right, so there's our handle submit. Now our button here, there's a lot of stuff you may want to do to make this more robust, especially because we're staying on the same page. But like if I like refresh this page, I can click the button right away, but I didn't change anything. So that's really honest, you know, kind of a silly thing to do, you know, like I can just sit here and smash this button, yet I haven't changed anything. And you can see like I'm making successful updates here. Like those are all working, and it was responding with actually, I'm wondering why our version isn't changing. Oh, maybe because it knows the data is not changing. I was expecting the version to be incrementing, but I think it might be because it's no data is changing. It's not actually incrementing it. So let's just check it. Let's just see what happens. Oh, So, okay, so we just want to look at, so something's not working correctly. I think if I refresh this, it's not going to. Yeah, so it's not being saved. Okay, yeah, so it's not working. So. So I can kind of, to figure out what's going on, I want to look at the network call first, just to kind of see if that's doing what I expect. So. Yeah, we went to the right page. We were doing a put. And then for me to see what data I sent, I go to payload here. So payload's the body. And I can see that we're passing bedrooms and name and summary. But then when we respond, that, new data isn't there. So let's go back and look at our method. So let's check. So I'm gonna console log the request body and then also potentially summary and name and just see what we're getting. Okay, so notice our body only has ID, name, bedrooms, and not our summary in it. Which I'm surprised by because we had it in the payload. Huh. Oh. Now it's there. Oh, I think maybe because I refreshed it and hit it that it wasn't showing up. Okay, sorry, I was confused for a second. Okay, so now it's there. So great place to stay is showing up in the summary. I check our database real quick. Okay, so summary is not being saved to the database. So let's check our model. So that looks right to me. So let's check.
Does it still update the name?
What?
I wonder if it would still update the name.
Yeah, we can check that. Yeah, so the name got updated in this case.
Is it possible that when we created the like test location, that since we didn't create an actual summary for it, doesn't exist? Like even if we have it in the schema, if we didn't have it in the test, it doesn't have a thing to update. Like I don't know if that makes sense, but like when we created, we didn't create a summary with it.
Right, yeah, it should, like, you should be able to, or I mean, you certainly can like add properties that didn't exist before.
Okay.
So I think. Also, I'm not sure why our version is not getting incremented, which I find weird. But yeah, we can see, hold on, I want to look at. Yeah, so for some reason it's not getting set. I wonder if I need to restart my server. 1 second. I guess that is what I needed to do. Okay, so now it's working. I think. When I updated the model, I don't think that that triggered a refresh of the server. For some reason, because now it is in there.
So do you have to like restart when you mess with the schema or?
I guess so. I didn't think I would need to. I'm not sure exactly what that issue was there, but yeah, now it's working. And my version's not getting incremented, which I find interesting. But I can look that up later. Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure what that weird glitch was, but yeah, now you can see that, you know, we can change the summary and the name. And, you know, when we refresh the page, it's being persisted. And if we go back to we go back to the listings page, we can see there's our test location with the updated data, right? So sorry, I'm like horrible at predicting how long these things are going to take lately. So I don't think we're going to get to relations. So that's another thing that's going to have to happen in the capstone. But let's talk a little bit more about like what would be ideal for this page. So we don't want to let them just like load this page and just start hammering this button, right? It just doesn't make sense. So what do you guys typically see when you deal with a page that has this kind of, it has like allows updating data?
Like a grayed out button until you make a change?
Yeah, good. So you guys know what property we'd use on the button to just get going on that?
This disabled.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we can use disabled. Good, so how do we figure out when to allow them to press update?
when the state changes.
Yeah.
You'd want a edit button on there, maybe.
Well, yeah, so that's one option. We could have like, we could start this page off by just having like typography. And then like have an edit button. When they click the edit button, then they'd get the forms. But still, even if they clicked edit, you'd still want to disable that button until they've at least changed one field, right? So how can we, like, what can we do to see? And truly, we only really want to let them update it if they've actually changed information. So if they go in there and like delete a letter and then add it back, and it's the same, it goes back to the original state. Like
Yeah,
even that's a good user experience to be like, now it's disabled again because it was exactly what it was before. Because when people are updating data, they're like nervous, and you want to give them a good experience. So who has like a hunch of how we can potentially know whether or not it's like different than it was before?
Oh, if it's different.
can you compare it to the listing like in the database before the change has been made, or?
Yes,
Okay,
compare it to the listing, compare it to the original listing is the strategy. So how could we do that?
Is this with use effect and the dependency array being the state that's changing, or
That is an interesting thought. I think there might be something there, but like my initial idea is simply to like sort of, well, because of the way I chose to set this up, where I'm directly modifying the data that comes in originally, actually makes this a little bit harder. But because like if we had set this up to just have like new state for the form that just had a default value, like we could just say, hey, are any of these fields different than the original field in the original listing that we loaded? But we are modifying it directly. Now I find that a little bit easier than like originally with what I was trying to get done originally. But now that we want to make the form a little bit better, we may want to undo that, but we could still pull it off. So basically what we could say is there's listing, and then we could just say like const original listing. I did it add there. So we just have like basically just like a cached version of it. So it may seem a little like, hey, we're kind of duplicating, but it's not that big of a deal. So we've got the listing and then like a cached original listing. And so whenever we fetch it and we set listing to data, we would also just set the original listing to data as well. What did it import? Okay, we don't need that. So now we've got like the current version that then can be updated by the form, but then we also have a cached version that we can compare it to. And so we can, down here in the button, we can just say it is disabled. And yeah, it knew to do this, which I love. Yeah, it's disabled if they're equal to each other. Now, two objects being equal to each other is kind of a complicated thing. They're like different objects, and so they're not going to be equal to each other. So, but if you want to know if the contents of the object, like if all the properties are the same, this is one way to do it, which is like to turn it into the JSON form of it, which is just a long string, and then compare those two strings together. So this is like a valid way to do that. So yeah, disable the button if the current listing, which they could have updated, is the same as the original. So we can save that and test this out. So it's disabled. We can delete the in, and now we could update, but if I add the in back, it's like, hey, that's the same. And that, I think, I mean, I've seen experiences like this, where like, you know, it will act that way. So yeah, this is a little bit better. Now, if we then submit this, we would want to re-disable this button. So the only thing we're missing there is, whenever we update it, we've got this current handle submit, and we're just setting the listing. And so we could also set the original listing or the cache listing at that moment as well, just to kind of reset this thing. So I think now we should get, yeah, disabled, and then update it, and then back to disabled. Yeah, so there's always like, whenever you're doing front end work and you're doing things like this, there's always like the minimal get it working version. And then there's like a ton more time you could spend getting it to be like the best user experience possible, you know? And it's always a sort of balance of, you know, the project you're on and how important the user experience is at that moment, and just balancing the time to get it to a certain spot. But those are things to think about whenever you're building this stuff. It's just like, well, what are like, when I use a form currently, what are the niceties that those things have that make it so that I feel confident, I know what I'm doing, and I'm getting feedback, and it's like a good user experience. If you want to be a good front end or full stack developer, kind of just knowing what those base sort of table stakes are of what good apps provide, which changes over time. Like skeletons that we talked about last time is like a pretty new thing. So just kind of paying more attention when you use web apps of like what is happening on the forums and stuff like that can be really helpful for you to just kind of know what you may need to try to add whenever you're building this stuff out. Okay. All right. So we didn't get to the relations stuff, but that's okay. Well, there's still, you know, stuff we can learn during the capstone, and so we'll move relations and permissions to early in the capstone. And for Saturday, it will be just trying to do a CRUD app, like getting data, adding data, updating data, deleting data, but for like a different, so we'll do it for like a different data set than this like Airbnb data set. Probably go back to coffee shop stuff actually, since that's been what we've been doing for so long. So that's the plan for Saturday, is to work on that, and that will be the last class.
Sounds good.
Oh,
Cool. All right. You guys have a good night, and I will see you on Saturday.
Thanks, Zach.
See ya.
See you Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.